afternoon. My name is Marty Hinman. I'm a member of the Education Committee. I'm delighted to welcome you to putting the MPA to work in your jurisdiction. You may have heard the Ethics and Legislative Committee refer to the Model Practice Act as a set of Lego instructions to help a jurisdiction update its statutes. In this session, you will learn about the recent MPA Workshop and how jurisdictions are using the MPA to build their own Legoland and modernize their practice acts. The speakers for this session are Cherie Smith, Craig Miller, and Jean Wolford, who are all members of the Ethics and Legislation Committee. You can find their bios on your event app. They have valuable information to share, and we also encourage your participation. If you wish to ask a question at the end, please wait for one of the members of the Education Committee to bring a mic around so we can make sure it gets recorded clearly. Please abide by the ground rules in the program notebook so more attendees have a chance to ask questions. And at the end of the session, please scan the QR code to complete your evaluation. We have 2 people on our committee from Texas, and we will rope you in if you do not fill those out. We really appreciate your feedback, and now I will turn the presentation over to our speakers.
Thank you so much. I was going to make a grandma reference, but I'm not going to after that in there. It was kind of funny. Welcome and thanks for attending our presentation. We're going to be talking today about the Model Practice Act and in particular how to really put it to use in your jurisdiction. So first off, how many of you, if any, attended the Model Practice Act workshop in July after Life? Okay, just a couple. Good, so it'll be good for you guys to build upon and maybe add to the discussion at the end. And for those of you who weren't in attendance at that, you'll be able to learn a little more about how you can put it to use for you. First, I would like to acknowledge, since they had no time in the other room to do so, the great members of our Ethics and Legislation Committee. 2 of them are up here presenting with me today. We have Craig Miller from Michigan and Jean Wilford from Maryland. And in the audience, we have Steve Scherger from the great state of Minnesota. And we also wanted to acknowledge our 2 members who aren't here, Bettina Brown from New Mexico and Sarah Conrad, also from Minnesota. We also wanted to acknowledge our great liaison, Michelle Thornman from the PT Board of Directors, and the person that really keeps us all together, Leslie Adrian, who is our FSBPT staff, and Rich Wolf. And here, this little photo that you see here is us enjoying a break. We don't get many breaks on our committee, but when Leslie does let us out every once in a while, we actually got to have lunch on the rooftop deck at the FSBPT office. So if you haven't checked that out yet, next time you're in Alexandria, it's worth it. All right, we're going to be doing a few Slido polls in here. So we're going to get started if you want to get out your phones. And I'm not sure how many people we have in here, but we'll figure that out after the first. So we'll start with the first question, which is a pretty basic one, and it's just how familiar are you with the Model Practice Act? And then I have a question. Is it going to show me up here? Okay, I'll advance my slide. Thank you. We'll see what our number is. I know there's more than 11. We're very happy to see, since we feel like we've been talking about it for a year, that a lot of people know how to where to find it and have referred to it. Okay, that looks like it's about done, so we have about 20. So about 40% of you know where to find it, 30% or thereabouts have referred to it, 14% nerds that have read it cover to cover, including the commentary, and then 14% that don't know about it, which we expect, because especially if this is your first meeting or if you haven't had to update your statute, it might be something you're not as familiar with. So we hope to change that by the end of our presentation. The Model Practice Act, otherwise known as the MPA, is really a foundation for your board to be able to use as a guide whenever you're going to be updating the statutes in your jurisdiction. The newest edition, the 7th edition, as you heard in there, has just been published in January and is now what you will find if you go on the free resources page and click on Model Practice Act. So what we want you to think of it as is kind of your jurisdiction's set of Lego instructions, how to get from point A to point Z of what you want your statute to look like and include. Although there are not model rules, there is at the end of the Model Practice Act a very extensive commentary that can help you when you are redoing your rules or regulations in your jurisdiction. Gives you guidance on language, things you want to be sure that you're thinking of and including if you're redoing your rules and regulations. So this picture makes me think of my now 25-year-old son bedroom about 15 years ago. He was a genius Lego, and still kind of is. He still enjoys Legos a little. But I wonder how many of you, if you have had to take on trying to update your statute, how many in the room have been on your board when you've tried to update your statute or your rules or been involved with the association? So a fair number of you. So I assume some of you might have felt like my son felt when he sat at this desk, envisioning this beautiful end product that you want, and then wondering how in the world do I get there? So the question is, why would you want to work like that when you could work like this? Having a framework of instructions to help you through the process, using a really great model that is the gold standard of physical therapy regulation, and also what we're going to be giving you today, not only having the gold standard of the Model Practice Act, but having some tools, some hands-on actual tools that you can use to help guide you through the process. And that's really what the MPA Workshop was about as well, was just sort of how to get from point A to point B. So with the advent of these 7th edition changes, our committee, the Ethics and Legislation Committee, was tasked by the Board of Directors to partner with our great FSBPT staff and to hold an MPA workshop to guide jurisdictions through these changes and to kind of show jurisdictions how to use them to benefit, how to use the tools to benefit their jurisdictions when updating the statute. The workshop was held the day following life, and it was a day-long event. We brought together 3 member teams, and all jurisdictions were invited. To participate, each state had to have representation from both their state physical therapy board and their association, their local chapter of the APTA. So you could not attend if you didn't have both of those components, and most of our teams consisted of 3-member teams, usually the administrator from the board member, and then the APTA representative. And we did have 32 of our jurisdictions that attended. So we figured that that was pretty good turnout for the amount of time that had been since this had happened previously. Oops. Trying to scroll down there. Okay. There were many, sorry. No, I do know what I'm doing. I know it doesn't look like it. There we go. No, it's good. There was a lot of energy in the room, and it's all good. That's what I was doing. But okay, thank you. There was a lot of energy in the room when when we all gathered to do this, and it was really fun to see the board and the association from each state kind of powwowing. Sometimes, and a lot of the feedback we got was that some of them hadn't been together just to talk about, you know, their statutes in their state and the process, and what do we both, you know, together want moving forward with changing of the statute. So there's a lot of comments about the really positive energy and just being able to be in the same room together to work through the things. Okay, we're going to go on to our next Slido poll. And the question is, where is your jurisdiction in the post-MPA workshop process? You have no idea. They didn't attend but hope to. That's great that that's the biggest thing we're seeing here, so that's what we're going to be talking about. Looks like we have almost everybody. We'll give it just another minute. It looks like our lowest is that the people that did attend it have had a meeting since the workshop. A little more than that have absolutely no idea. Some have a meeting planned, and then a lot of you that did not attend the workshop. So that's great. What we're going to talk about today is giving you the tools that were given also to the people when they came to the workshop. So if your jurisdiction did not have somebody who attended, you can go ahead and start the process, you know, after you leave today. If somebody did attend and you just weren't the person that did, get with them and see kind of where they are in the process, and that should be very helpful to you. Our hope as your Ethics and Legislation Committee is that by continuing that process that we started at the MPA workshop and by giving you the tools that we're going to be going over with you today, that you'll be able to go out and create your own little Legolands all the way from California to New York. So we're going to go into more specifics about these tools that you can take with you. You will be able to find these tools, I believe, on the app. And if not, you can email us, myself or Leslie, with our information at the end, and we'll get the tools for you to use to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Craig to talk more specifically about the MPA.
All right. So thank you all for being here. And I think with the last Slido poll, seeing that there were a number of attendees here in the room that weren't able to attend the workshop, hopefully this will be something that you can take back to your jurisdiction and work through it. The idea was never to be a one and done, so that we were just meeting the one time in the workshop and then say that you were good to go. The idea was to give you the tools. We'll go over it again today, and Jean will do that in a little bit. And then you can take that back to the jurisdiction to be able to kind of follow through and have some ongoing collaboration and make some decisions. All right, so as we noted earlier, it's been 30 years since the task force was first formed, and we just passed the 25th anniversary of the Model Practice Act. So as Cherie said, it's the 7th edition. You know, and all of that time, for those of us who have been practicing, going all the way back to the first iteration of it. Oh, see, we should have put a Slido poll in for that. That'd be the grandma comment from the last session, right? All right. You know, I think it's safe to say that there's been an evolving landscape of how we've practiced and how we've provided physical therapy services to our patients and clients, right? Our practice has moved more on with evidence-based practice. You know, we've had to deal with issues related to reimbursement and then ongoing regulatory issues, such as was brought up previously with even boundary violations, sexual misconduct, that sort of thing. So I think that it is really truly safe to say that we've all continued to evolve our practice, just as we've suggested, and the FSBPT has allowed us to help move the Model Practice Act along. There are a number of topics that we covered. We've had an opportunity since we came up with the final version that was approved by the board to talk about this topic a handful of times. So instead of trying to discuss some of the things for those of you who maybe have heard about the Model Practice Act before, I'm going to try and highlight a few of the items that maybe haven't really been talked about that were updated in this latest version of the Model Practice Act. So first things first, and I think I might be safe because I'm pretty sure, I don't think there's any attorneys in the room. If there are any though, please excuse the language that I try to convey to everybody. But I do remember in one of the earlier sessions, someone had brought up the comment related to the act versus the rules, right? And really trying to understand what the difference is between them, because a lot of times those words are conflated with one another and people use them interchangeably when in reality they really shouldn't be doing that. So we do use a lot of acronyms, we do use a lot of different terms, and it can become a very, very tangled mess, kind of like the Lego desk picture that Cherise showed you a moment ago. So I don't want it to be a legal symposium, but to kind of set the field for everybody. In order to understand it, first, there's the Practice Act, right? The Practice Act is the actual law or statute that is passed by a legislative body, right? There could be federal laws, there can be your state laws, those types of things, whereas when you think about the rules, those actually are really something that's deferred to something like us, a state board, right? We're gonna establish the rules because we've been given a law or a charge in order to be able to do that. It doesn't make the rules any less important. They're still going to have the full force of a law, but they do come after the law is initially set. So one of the examples that I would give you is many jurisdictions will pass a law that PTs and PTAs have to demonstrate continuing competence, right? That's your law. We have to demonstrate competence. The rules can be given to the board to establish, well, what does that mean? How do we do that? Is there a certain amount of professional development requirements or CEUs that we need to have? Are there certain categories that they should be in? Are they only under one category? Is there only one way to demonstrate continuing education? And I think that many of us in this room would agree and say that the answer is no. There are many ways that you can demonstrate continuing competence. So with that being said, just as a quick summary, if you remember, the act or the law is passed by your state legislature, right? We as the board can take on the charge to pass the administrative rules or the rules. In Michigan, we refer to our law or act as the public health code, and that's more of a kind of overriding term that pulls in together a number of different laws. So I will say, is there anyone here from Colorado by any chance? Oh, good, so they can't say I plagiarized anything from the Colorado State University and their Public Health Law Center. But that's where a lot of this information came from that, really did a nice job of really describing and defining the differences between an act and a rule. All right, so as I said, there's a lot of information in the Model Practice Act. I know there are 2 or 3 of us that, as Cherise said, read it from cover to cover, including the commentary, right? So some of the things that we wanted to point out that we hadn't talked about previously in some of our presentations was that we added a number of different items, or further clarified depending upon the situation. But as an example, imaging and the use of needles, right? So that was put into the Model Practice Act. We don't recommend necessarily a laundry list of items because that laundry list could be very, very long, especially if you think about the depth and breadth of the areas that all of us cover. I know in one of the earlier sessions, they mentioned about supervision levels and how do you determine supervision levels when you're dealing with different areas of practice, home health versus skilled nursing versus outpatient. And so all of these things, it's good to consider them and give yourself, we'll say, some leeway so that you don't back yourself into a corner and then you're stuck with one very specific definition. So while that's not recommended, sometimes it is appropriate to use some of the items so that the intent is given to know what practice is, and as well not to limit the practice for other professions. So if you can, when you're working on it, try and avoid some of the sensitive trigger terms if you can, right? Because sometimes that gets you to become adversarial. Let's use, say, manipulation versus mobilization, right? We all know sometimes the chiropractors, they might not like that one depending upon the term that's used. Dry needling versus needle insertion, right? The acupuncturists in your state, depending upon the terms that are used, right, you can create an unnecessary barrier or obstacle to try and move through. So be mindful of using some of those trigger terms. The word imaging was added in the definitions of testing so that it was stated that it would be including but not limited to imaging. So that's one of the definitions of testing that physical therapists can do. Right now, the Ethics and Legislation Committee is working on an updated review on imaging, so that you can look forward to that in the very near future. Term and title protection certainly was mentioned earlier about the use of dynamic personal trainer, I think was, or personal training. However, that the last T part was mentioned with Lifetime Fitness and some of their marketing and advertising that goes out with that. Depending upon your particular jurisdiction, you may or may not have term and title protection. Fortunate in the state of Michigan, we do have term and title protection. So the use of that DPT is really meant for your doctor of physical therapy. So it's a good thing to, when Engine talks about the different areas that you can look at in the Model Practice Act and compare to what your jurisdiction has in statute, that would be a key area to look at. We did also add the term physio, because we know that there's, that term is used often interchangeably with physical therapists, physiotherapists. So that was added to the Model Practice Act language with this iteration. Let's see. See, now I can't get to the mouse. It's there somewhere. Nope. No. There it is. Yeah, exactly. So where's my grandma? We did also add to the definition of physical therapy in order to make sure that it was clear that within the scope of practice, as we all felt, and probably many of us even may practice it already, but doing health promotion and disease prevention, the performance of participation-focused examinations, right, such as return to sport, post-concussion type assessments, driving fitness, could all be part of areas that we are well capable of providing those services. Sometimes there can be rules to clarify some of the additional requirements that might go along with that. But I would be mindful to not put those specific criteria into the Practice Act. It does include all areas of practice. We were mindful that during many of our discussions, we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just a Model Practice Act that focused just on the clinical practice of physical therapy, but also included teaching and research as examples. And yes, there is always more. So some of the other areas that we discussed and then added into the Model Practice Act, endorsements of PTs and PTAs, including the impact from old scores. Again, pre-1996. You don't have to raise your hands again, but if you were started practicing before 1996, it's me too, then we would have very old scores. Or maybe I should just say old scores. I shouldn't say very old scores. Just go with old. I'll stick with old. I'll stick with old.
The geriatric scores.
Yeah, the geriatric scores, the ones that are on the walker and the cane, right? Yep. See, we're all in the same boat. So we also added language related to the endorsement of non-CAPD graduates. So, the term foreign educated has been used and brought up. The reality is that think about it as being a non-CAPD accredited is probably a term that might be more appropriate as opposed to carving out foreign educated. There's been the advent, and there's a discussion tomorrow afternoon on universal licensure recognition laws. There's some growth in that across the country, and the compact, telehealth registries, all of these things have brought to light that portability issue of licensees. How can non-CAPD individuals go through their processes so that they don't come across unfair practices simply based upon where their education occurred. We discussed that the endorsement for CAPD graduates shouldn't have a number of extra hoops to go through. I know we talk about the TOEFL, English language, the importance of being able to communicate effectively with your patients. We did also add in there the importance of workforce data collection that was mentioned next door just a little while ago, and how important that would be to put in your Practice Act so that there is the authority to collect that data on an ongoing basis. I know personally I can speak to Michigan. We had had a discussion with our umbrella agency about doing that exact thing. And again, no lawyers in the room, so I can hopefully get away with this. But the word opine, that's my least favorite word now, because we are always reminded that we as board members should not opine or give our opinion on certain information that comes in. But workforce data being collected, professional association having that connection and collaboration with the state board and the professional association, workforce data can be incredibly helpful for making decisions on policy, programs for education, et cetera, et cetera. So the importance of it is highlighted in the Practice Act. Having the full participation in the ELDD, right, the exam licensure and disciplinary database that had been discussed was the video at the very end there. The National Provider Data Bank is often used by many jurisdictions, but that's a very large and broad system. Having the ELDD helps to put you together with all of the physical therapy jurisdictions so that you can speak a common language and then share that information easily and readily versus a very, 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 very daunting database, being the National Provider Database, that may be insufficient for your particular jurisdiction. We did add to the MPA the PT, PTA with their patient-client relationship. How do you define that? Again, was mentioned in one of the other sessions about when does that relationship begin? Does it need to be a formal process, right? Is that someone coming into your clinic and then that's the only time there was a therapist or assistant relationship with a patient or client? What if someone asks you for your opinion and advice when you're at a gym working out because they happen to know you're a PT or a PTA? So there are important things to consider as far as when does that relationship start, and then just as well as when does that relationship end. During the presentation at lunch when we were talking, earlier in the morning, they were talking about kind of that psychological connection that therapists and assistants have with their patient or clients, right? When does that end, right? The moment you discharge them? Does that break that connection automatically? Maybe, maybe not. It isn't something that we specifically define as giving a specific number of days, months, year, what have you, but we really kind of just talk about it being, when you've discharged their services, right? The individual jurisdictions, again, by rule, maybe there's another way that you would like to define it, and there are jurisdictions that have defined it, but a wide variation in how they define that. I did want to give a little shout out to the, and I never say this right, but I'm going to try, the Sexual Misconduct and Boundaries Committee. Is this right? Close enough. Okay, all right. If you're If you're a first timer here, you have no idea that I just said that wrong, except for the fact that Leslie pointed it out, but that's all right. But at any rate, so, certainly that particular committee, that was a task force initially, but the importance of it was recognized to move into a full-blown committee, had a lot to do with helping to define, boundary violations, sexual misconduct, and how, then we could kind of take the great work that they did and help to incorporate that into the Practice Act. All right, so I have two favorite things. One is resources. And I don't know why I was tagged with the resources, but I was. And commentary. So as they know, I like to deal with the commentary part because I like to go on and on. But it's important to know that resources exist for your jurisdiction, for your board. Some of those resources are free to anybody, and then there are some that by virtue of being a member of your board and therefore FSBPT, that you can get to some of the member-only areas. So for the Model Practice Act, where can you find it? Well, that is one of the free resources. So anyone can go to the free resources in the top ribbon. Top 5 resources is where the Model Practice Act typically resides, because of course it's incredibly important. Once you go into the Model Practice Act area, then there is the blue box that when you click on that, you can actually get to the most current edition of the Model Practice Act. It's in there. So once, yep, so that's a great time to bring that up. When you go to the Model Practice Act, the way that it was set up was you had the Model Practice Act language all by itself. As you continue to scroll down the document, then it goes into the Model Practice Act with commentary. Of course, not every single part of the Model Practice Act has commentary, but as you just continue to scroll down, then you get into the guidelines for rules, I believe, is next, and then it goes into some information that was put in the appendix from the APTA about ethics, and that the Code of Ethics for PT and for the PTA. So it's all there in one document. Just recognize it's really the first, I don't even know how many pages it ultimately is in the beginning, but it does break down so that you know when the commentary begins. So you have just statutory language and then statutory language with comment and so on. So as much as possible, as was mentioned earlier, it's probably not the best way to work on your Lego set. And of course, if you had either Charisse or Leslie in any committee or work group that you're in, they would definitely make sure that it's like this, right? So me, them. Anyway, so the tool was introduced at the Model Practice Act workshop that was held in July, just after Life. Hopefully it will make the process a little less daunting for you. That crosswalk will help to make it easier for you to maybe even have a great starting point if you don't already collaborate with your state professional association. It would be a great way to actually talk about how you can work together and kind of design the statute and the language that makes sense, right? Many of us as board members are precluded from actually proposing legislation, statute, that sort of thing, but the professional association really can help to push those things forward. So if it comes up at your board meeting, it is something that you can use. With that, I am going to hand it over to Engine so that she can kind of walk you through what that actual tool looks like.
This is mine? Okay. So, hi. I'm just trying to get myself acclimated here. So, we had a task. The Model Practice Act, first of all, I just want to go back a little bit here. The Model Practice Act, when I first came to the FSBPT meeting a few years ago, I was like, wow, what a great idea. I don't understand. Why don't we use it? And then everybody kept going, well, you know, there's 53, 54 jurisdictions, and there's 53, 54 ways of doing things. And I was like, this This makes life a little bit harder for each and every one of our jurisdictions. So I decided to get a little bit more involved and get involved with this, and I had to say that the committee prior to me joining did a phenomenal job in getting this Model Practice Act up and running and discussing it. So what they did with that too is, well, so here you are, you've been given this information, and then now what are you going to do with it? So this great, it was wonderful. This workshop, Afterlife, brought together 32 different jurisdictions, and we were tasked before coming to the meeting. We weren't allowed to come to the meeting unless we had, as Cherie said, we had a member from our committee, from our local chapter, and then also our executive director or administrator. So prior to coming, we had to do our homework. We had to review the Model Practice Act, and then we were asked also to download our state's Practice Act. So if you can see here, we were given this task. It's broken down into 4 columns. And the first column outlines all of the different articles or overarching themes of the MPA. And the second column further breaks down the specific sections of the MPA and what the topics of each of them are. The members of each of these, oh, how do you do this? Oh, no, that's not it. Thank you. So the second column further breaks down the specific sections, and then the members of each team then looked up their state statutes and then looked up what their state statutes and then added which statute in their jurisdiction covers that same topic. And in the final column, any rules or regulations that also address the section. And if there was nothing in that statute, then they were left blank. So this is an example of the crosswalk that we did for Maryland. When we did it initially at the actual workshop, we were kind of lazy and we just put down the statutes and everything and just referred to it later. And then I went back and I completed the whole thing and, you know, cut and paste. It was pretty easy when you cut and paste. So some of them decided to cut and paste. Some teams decided to do the reference. It's whichever worked for you. But there was this wonderful form here that like set it up for you, that made it very easy to be able to compare everything. So that we found it to be so well designed and a useful tool to compare against the MPA. And when we compared our Practice Act to the MPA, it becomes very obvious how many items that our Maryland was missing. So, you know, kept going with none and none, and we did it for every section. So after we completed the crosswalk, we were also given this other tool. And this was the decision matrix. This matrix was a useful tool to identify and organize areas that did not align with the MPA. So if you look at here, there's an example of a completed decision matrix. The list of issues is broken into categories that allow you to start thinking about the impact on protection of the public now or in the future, with a list of considerations listed on the left and a rating scale of 1 to 3, 3 being a major impact and 1 being minimal. With each issue listed, you can score the level of impact along with the public considerations, if you so choose, as you can see in the first line. The next column rated the likelihood of the success in making the change legislatively, using the same scoring system of 1 to 3, with 3 being a strong chance and so on. And you want to keep in mind the considerations for the likelihood of success listed on the left. The total of the 2 columns will help you decide a path forward by prioritizing the issues. So the guiding principles for the Practice Act changes. Here are some overarching guiding principles for you to refer to and think about when making changes to your Practice Act. Number 1, the core responsibility of our boards is protection of the public. Take into consideration your language and the current administration. Oops. How do I go back up? Sorry. There you go. Thank you. So take into consideration your current language and the current administration, and you may have to tweak the language to align with the accepted administrative language of your state. You don't want to be too restrictive in your Practice Act that would limit competent practice, keeping in mind God, I really don't like this mouse. Keeping in mind the language, you do not, okay, keep in mind the language is positive, keep the language positive. Do not use the words such as can't or not allowed. Use an active versus passive voice, or use positive and affirming language. Compromises may need to be needed to push forward your changes, though. Most of us had to deal with that in the past, such as in dry needling bill. And timing. Timing is a very interesting concept, especially for us in the state of Maryland. It took over 5 years for the administration to even look at our proposal to change our continuing education to a continuing competency requirement. So consider eliminating the long laundry list of items that you're allowed or not allowed in your Practice Act so that physical therapists or physical therapist assistants may practice to their full level of competency and education, which would also allow an evolution of our profession. Remember, the statute is the what, and the rules of regulations are the how. Now I'm going to turn it over to Charisse. Oops, sorry.
That's all right.
And then we can start with the panel discussion.
I'm just going to go back to this for 1 second, just to be sure that, because I know that these documents are something you haven't seen before, but once you fill out the crosswalk, like Jean was talking about, you know, which is a lot longer than you see on here. It's like this long by the time you fill it out. And then go to the decision matrix. You can see here that by these total numbers, you'd be able to kind of identify what are our most important initiatives that we want to try to get through with our legislature. And then, you know, it may be that you only, you know, you could only try 3 things. And if it's more than that, it's going to be too laborious and it's not going to be able to make it through. So that's kind of the art to it, but this is a really good objective tool to be able to use to get the ball rolling. So thanks for going through all that. Okay, now you hopefully have a better idea of the tools that are out there for your jurisdictions to put the Model Practice Act to use. What I'd like for you guys to do is, if you know for sure that your state has not started this process, then you can reach out to Leslie or myself, and we'd be happy to speak with you. I'd be happy to call you and kind of talk you through the process. We can give you the tools to get the process rolling. If you aren't sure if somebody from your jurisdiction attended, then check with them, because chances are 32 jurisdictions did attend, so they may have, and then you can get involved that way. Our hope is that the Model Practice Act is not just this gold standard document sitting out there in document land, but that it becomes something that you're really working with your hands, getting down and dirty and spending a lot of time figuring it all out. So that's really our hope. And it will help to make the public protection even stronger in your state. So instead of you know, just having a lot of unsure ideas about what you want to do when your legislators do come to you, and it is so different state to state. In Nevada, my old state, we as a board were able to write the statute, present it to the legislature. So, you know, there's a lot of variability, so that's also the thing, is sort of getting clear with what is able to be done in your state. So now we are going to do a little discussion, panel discussion, just to give you an idea of how some of the states that did attend the Model Practice Workshop, what they have done between July and October. So I'm going to start. I guess I'll sit down here, so it's a real panel. Testing 1, 2, 3. You have to turn on the mic. Okay. So we're just going to talk through a couple of the different states, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. Before I speak about my current state of Oregon, is there anyone in the room from Oregon? Okay, good. Because I don't want to misspeak. I'm pretty sure I know what has been happening in Oregon. So Michelle Sigmund Gaines is the administrator for Oregon, who many of you know her, and she, I am an Oregon resident, but I am not on the Oregon board. And I was previously the chair of the Nevada board before I moved to Oregon. So knowing, and she was on this committee. So before the Model Practice Act workshop even started, she called me and wanted to review all the documents. So she was very proactive, came with everything already pre-filled out. She had already kind of tried to cross-reference everything, which made it really a nice experience for Eric. I think it's Erica, who's her board chair, herself, and the APTA person that attended. She followed up after the July meeting, holding a follow-up meeting with Erica, the board chair, herself, and the APTA representative, and they met in August to finalize. They had finished the crosswalk, but then they had not transferred everything over onto the decision matrix to see what their top priorities should be. So they finished out that process. And then the reason they did that in August is she knew they had a September board meeting, so they then presented it to the board as a new idea and new information. And the APTA legislative person also attended the board meeting, so there was a lot of collaboration. So they are really well on their way to having an idea of what they want to be able to present to the Oregon legislature for their next round of updating statute. So now I'm going to turn it over to Craig, who's going to talk about what they have done in Michigan.
So much different to hold on to it versus just standing up there. So for Michigan, we've had a few different things have happened since then. So we did have a meeting with the state association, the legislative director, after the workshop, so that we could talk through some of the topics that were there. Just one thing to try and caution the group on is to really try and see if you can use that decision matrix, because it can seem like you're really gung-ho and you just want to try and get everything that you want to get right away and just be done with it, right? And the reality is that politically that can be very, very challenging to do. So really trying to set priorities is a good thing. And also being mindful, one of the things that came up as we looked at the crosswalk, and that is how things are at least layered in Michigan, and may or may not be the same in your jurisdictions. I can't speak to it, but there are sections for the PTs, PTAs in Michigan that we refer to as the PT Practice Act. And there's our laws, statutes that are in that section. But then within our broader health code, as we term it in Michigan, some of that information is kind of higher up into the statutes and regulations. So as an example, although we have continuing competency and the board was able to define what was inclusive for the 24 professional development requirements that we have, up in our broader public health code, we're also required to have implicit bias training with each license renewal. It's not specific to PT/PTA, it applied to all public health or all health professions. So there can be portions of your statute, your act, to be aware of that could apply to PT/PTA. Telehealth would be another example for us. Telehealth was in our broader statute for the Public Health Code, wasn't specifically mentioned in the quote PT Practice Act, but it did have the board actually create a rule, because the broader Public Health Code or broader act for health professions did require us to have rules developed for telehealth within our particular rule set. So I think be mindful of that. That's one of the things that we encountered, that we're so focused on just the PT Practice Act that kind of lost sight of the fact that there were other areas that lined up with the Model Practice Act but was in a different part of our health code. With that, I will hand it over to NG.
So I'm here to represent Minnesota and Maryland. Steve was very kind enough to give me an update of what his state is doing, and it's very similar to what Craig was saying as well. There is this overlying occupational health statute that covered a lot of the little things that we didn't have, like legislative intent and stuff like that. But I have to say kudos to Minnesota, because you are far more advanced than we are in Maryland right now, unfortunately, because you guys have met. The state has met. You've gotten together with all of the parties that are needed to be in this meeting, and they have given kudos, of course, to the crosswalk and to the decision matrix. Very, very well organized, and they were very impressed with the way this was designed, and they are going to continue reviewing all of their statutes and continue with going forth with some of the ideas that the crosswalk showed deficiencies with in the against the Model Practice Act. Now, Maryland, we have a legislative committee, and fortunately in Maryland, we are allowed to write our own statutes and go to the legislator. We have great representation with that. We had a meeting scheduled, and we did spend a lot of time, and Lori and I, who was the executive director, had a wonderful time meeting our representative from the APTA for the first time and understanding how important it is to have a relationship develop with your local chapter in order to help push these statutes and new regulations through. And fortunately, this is a very timely thing for us as well in Maryland, because in 2025, there is a review of our statutes that's been embedded. So we can start working on it. I hope it doesn't take till 2025 for us to make all the necessary changes that we would like to make, but you know, who knows? So we have the decision matrix and the crosswalk finished. We just need to now have our meeting. So unfortunately, it was postponed in September, and we hope to get that scheduled shortly and then move forward, because there are a lot of things that the Model Practice Act opened our eyes to. I mean, for instance, the definition of physical therapy in Maryland is a little bit lacking, so we need to work on all of those little fine tunes.
Thank you, and Jean. Yes.
I have to say something. It amazes me. I don't know. How many of you, by a show of hands, is your board able to write your own statute? Okay, so they're okay. All right, I'm feeling like the oddball out. You know, they're even bringing in Minnesota, and you can't in Minnesota. Yeah. So remember, my least favorite word now is that opine. I cannot opine on what should or shouldn't be done. Anyway. All right.
Like they say, 54 different ways.
That's the important part for us, I think, out here for tools. How do you look up the overriding rules? That's the important thing to know what our role is allowed to be.
So
Do you need legal counsel before you start this? As a board?
So I don't think you would need legal counsel to start looking at that information. I can speak to it in Michigan. There are definitions in the public health code, in our statute, Model Practice Act per se for the state, that basically gives you the definition of boards, what boards' duties and responsibilities are. So it helps to kind of outline what you're allowed to do and or not allowed to do. I guess I would suggest that if that seems unclear when you look to see where the definition of your boards are, and again, for us in Michigan, that's all of the health boards lumped together. There's no distinction between whether it's medicine, PT, PTA, speech, what have you. So they all have the same. Advisory is the key term that's in our statute. We are an advisory board, therefore we are not allowed to actually write the statute.
And we're going to have you do one more Slido poll before, and then we'll take any additional questions that you guys have. But I did want to also recognize Taj in the back of the room from the APTA. She was at the Model Practice Workshop, and it's just been really great to have that APTA involvement and counterpart, and she has continued. She has been with us through when we first started to revise the Practice Act. So she's been with us all along the way. So thank you for being here. Okay, one last Slido poll, and then we'll open it for questions. Question is, how are you feeling now about the process of updating your state statutes and using these tools that we're going to be providing to you if you want them to do so? So take a moment. Oh, we like this.
Yeah, stop it right there.
Some people are ready to put these tools to use. And nobody is terrified by the legislative, well, maybe I should answer that.
Both things can be true.
That's right, both can be true at the same time. All right.
Only things were so cut and dry.
And while you're finishing that, I'm just going to say that in the world of universal recognition, telehealth registries, the PT Compact, these things that are in play to decrease the barriers to licensure, us being able to kind of ride that regulatory wave, or maybe here in Florida to prevent that regulatory hurricane, or in my state, tsunami, depends on where you live, I guess. The more in alignment all of our jurisdictions can be, the better we can move forward as a collective whole. So that's really the purpose behind all of this. So good to see these numbers. And we do have 10 minutes for questions. We tried to leave some time. And so if you have a question, I see there's one in the back. And we have one back there with Taj. Now that I've called her out, she's going to call us out.
So Paul Klaponis, I'm here on the board in Florida. Florida has been a magnet for lots of healthcare fraud over many, many years. And our Practice Act and the Practice Acts across the board, we all come under the division of MQA, Medical Quality Assurance, that answers directly to the Florida Surgeon General, and everything comes under that. So there are overarching statutes that govern everything. There are some things, you know, someone commits a felony, misdemeanor, drug charges, those kinds of things. That goes immediately to the Surgeon General, and he puts out a writ that immediately goes to the board for action, and then it gets put on the board agenda very quickly. But you use the word opine, that your lawyers don't like you to use that, and it's just the opposite here. Our lawyers want us to opine, both the prosecutorial and our board counsel, because they will quickly admit, I don't know anything about what you do. And so I'm going to advise you on how to implement the rules you've written or and to enforce the law. But they want to hear from us. And the thing is what I started to say about Florida. The laws are really strict. So not to pick on Michigan, but a lot of times we get applications for endorsement, and it's someone is practicing in your state because of the way your laws are written. They can practice in your state if they failed 6 times. In Florida, if you fail the exam 5 times, you're done. You can never be your whole life a physical therapist in the state of Florida. So that's going to be a big sticking point when it comes other issues associated with the compact. And it's going to be very convoluted, and the software matrix that's going to run the API is going to have to be very particular about who eventually, when we get in it, if we do, because our legislature turfed it. You know, there's going to be lots of stuff going on for Florida.
I was just going to say, I know Florida is an especially challenging state when it comes to things like that. So I think and I'll let you speak to the opine, but I think that to answer also your question, knowing how things work in your state is very important, but doing this crosswalk and matrix so that you as a board know what your priorities are. So when and if you are able to give input, you kind of know what those priorities are. And it'll vary, you know, that independent boards to the umbrella boards are like day and night. So thus in lies the challenge of the FSBPT.
If I could just add, so Florida
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, go. Go ahead real quick, and then we have one in the
I was just
back.
going to say really quickly, Florida has an interesting set of rules that all the practice acts come up for what's called sunshine.
Right,
For complete
right.
review periodically.
Yeah. Okay, Taj.
Taj, before you ask that question,
Okay. Go
so
ahead.
just from a Michigan standpoint, the opining issue comes into giving an opinion or an assessment related to objective things that may come in. So for example, we had asked and tasked our umbrella department, LARA, Licensing and Regulatory Administration, that we wanted to know some workforce data. Could they at least tell us how many licensees had, applied, how many had passed, that sort of thing, so that we could kind of see numbers. An example there was, well, you can't opine on is your workforce moving in the right direction, the wrong direction, that sort of thing. Certainly during our board meetings, we opine, if that's the right term, on how to discipline individuals, how to set up the rules. That stuff's all fine. They just don't like it if we start moving into that statutory that we're interpreting something that they believe falls under their authority. They're very on top of us as far as that's concerned. And for the licensure testing issue with the NPTA or NPTE, I believe it's the same as FSBT. There's a maximum of 6 trials and then or 2 low test scores, and then they can apply to request an exception where the board may grant them an opportunity to take it again. To my knowledge, I believe we've done that once to give them an extra chance. So they still have to take and pass that NPTE. They just haven't. They have a route to ask if they had exceptions and that sort of thing.
Okay, Tosh.
I swear I'm not going to grill you all.
Go ahead, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to really quickly say to all the people here for their jurisdictions that as a representative of APTA State Affairs, more than happy to connect you with your state chapter. So if anyone needs any help in that regard, please reach out to me. That's it. Also, I have not heard the word opine since pre-law in my lobbying days, so.
And the state attorney guy, he's younger than me. And I'm like, opine, I had to go look it up.
Any more questions? Leslie. Uh-oh.
Could you guys please tell people about the new section in news briefs that is
Yes,
highlighting
actually,
the MPA?
I did have that written down. So news briefs, which was referenced earlier by Rich, which you should all get in an email. If you don't, be sure that you look into signing up at that out at the desk. It comes monthly, and there is a new feature, we like to call it a feature, called Model Practice Act Moment. And each month, a different section or subsection of the Model Practice Act will be highlighted along with the commentary that goes with it. So that's kind of a good way to start, understanding a piece at a time what this is all about. Thank you. We have time for another question if anybody has one. We have one in the back.
The forms that you referenced, the crosswalk, and is there a place where we can find those?
It's not currently located on a particular place, but if you see, and it doesn't look like your email, but if you email Adrian, is that it, at fsbpt.org, and it's ADRIAN with the letter L before it, she'll be happy to pass those on to you along with my information. I'm happy to talk with anybody who, wants to spend a little time one-on-one talking about how to get it implemented. Any other questions? Oh, we do have one more.
Please vote if you haven't submitted your vote. You do, but as we encourage licensees to renew early before the deadline, so are you encouraged to vote. Look, Jeff's gonna get mad.
And you know what they say, vote early and vote often.
Can I vote
I will say this as I don't know if it'll be a closing remark or not, but I would encourage any of you. I know they brought it up earlier about volunteering for different committees or task force or that. So or voluntold, I guess, is another way of opining on what you would say. But I really, really, truly encourage you to look for any of the volunteer opportunities that are out there for FSBPT. I mean, the wealth of information that you can obtain from the FSBPT staff by doing that and working with your other jurisdictions is priceless.
And this is an especially fun and a way to really learn a lot about a lot of things. So we have one more question.
I just wanted to give kudos to Engine. Engine and I sat down with our APTA colleague who was clueless about, I hate to say, the statutes and regulations that she's licensed under. So that was the first hurdle, and she was jaw-dropping, amazed, and very, very engaged, and we will be inviting her to continue to participate. And the two of us also sat down with board counsel, which hasn't really been mentioned, but I just wanted to say that for us, it was good to get the perspective of board counsel before we're bringing it to our legislative committee that's made up of board members. Because if your board counsel isn't supporting or has good history as to why something is the way it is and why it can or cannot, it provides Engine, who's the chair of our legislative committee, an opportunity to prepare, because board counsel sits on that committee, and we also are fortunate to have a legislative coordinator. And she is very well versed in how the assembly will or will not receive a bill. So just some, advice and things that we're learning along the way as we're very excited about implementing any changes we can, but being cautionary about every administration perceives things differently. So we hope for the most part, we felt very good about where our statutes are, but we certainly have areas that we'd like to improve and update as well. So thanks, Engine, for your work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, if you guys wouldn't mind filling out the evaluation on the link, we are done because we have less than a minute left. And thank you very much for your time and engagement today. We appreciate it.